Hey, what's up? It's Cute What If? This side. Today we will be seeing, what if Deku became the demon of vengeance? Before we move ahead with the FIC, leave a like and subscribe to the channel for future what ifs like this. As soon as All Might told him he could not become a hero, something in Izuku Midoriya broke. Ever since he had been labeled quirkless, his life had felt like a constant struggle. His mother was his only lifeline, but she worked so often that they rarely had time together. He still bore burns from being bullied by Katsuki Bakugo and his friends, and a prominent birthmark on his face had only compounded his insecurities. When Izuku realized All Might had left, he also noticed how close he was to the edge of the rooftop. He could not believe that someone had left a child there after shattering their dream. He remembered Bakugo's taunt about jumping off the roof and hoping for a quirk in the next life. The words stung, and Izuku looked over the edge, imagining freedom from everything that had hurt him. His thoughts returned to his mother. She would miss him, but perhaps life would be easier for her if he were gone. He thought she would have less to worry about and more money without him depending on her. Without further hesitation, he stepped off the roof. Time seemed to slow as he fell. His miserable life flashed before him, the abuse from classmates, the neglect of teachers, All Might's rejection. And the small moments of joy with his mother, the photo of him in an All Might onesie, their Katsudon dinners, the rare times they watched events together kept surfacing even as he descended. The impact should have been the end, but instead something unexpected happened. Pain flared and then a strange sensation of repair moved through him. He felt his body knit itself back, stronger and more energized. He sat up and tested his limbs, realizing he had developed a quirk, a rapid regenerative ability that left him bewildered and alive. He checked his battered flip phone. It was late, his mother must be worried. As he staggered home, the smell of smoke reached him. He looked toward their apartment complex and broke into a run. The building was engulfed in flames. There were no emergency crews yet and no heroes in sight. He burst through his front door and called for his mother until he could hear her faint reply. Pushing aside the smoke, he found her, but she was gravely injured. He gathered her and ran for the exit. As they cleared the doorway, an explosion rocked the building and threw them outward. When he scrambled to his feet, he crawled to his mother and supported her. His mother, with effort, spoke to him. She told him she was sorry she could not give him a better life or a quirk. She said he had been the best part of her life and that she had never regretted having him. She urged him to follow his heart and promised her support. With a faint smile, she fell still. Grief overwhelmed Izuku. He screamed, promising he would not forgive those responsible and vowing retribution if they had taken his mother from him. Heat licked at his skin, but it was not just the fire. His quirk was active and burning sensations passed over him as his body reacted and healed. He collapsed to his knees with his mother's limp form in his arms. Two voices came from behind. A man spoke about the woman who had refused his advances after he claimed to have rescued her from a thug, using crude language that made Izuku's blood run cold. The other remarked on the lack of heroes, saying most had been occupied dealing with another incident. The two stepped closer and discussed covering up what had happened, suggesting they would blame the deaths on villains. The realization hit Izuku: these were heroes. Something deep and repressed inside him ignited. A fierce, absolute hatred for the injustice he had endured. Before they could react further, Izuku moved with sudden speed. In a blur, he produced a small bladed tool and struck both men with precision. The confrontation was quick and decisive. He incapacitated them so they could no longer stand. He stood over the fallen men and thought bitterly about how different their lives must have been compared to his comfort and praise versus neglect and scorn. He recognized them as associates of endeavor. The anger at the system that allowed such people to thrive only grew. With the men no longer a threat, Izuku returned to his mother. The flames still consumed much of the building, and there was no way to save her. He made a painful decision to ensure no one else could claim her, placing her into the fire and stepping back as the blaze took what remained. The finality of it settled over him like a cold weight. He was alone and had crossed a line. He had taken action that could not be undone. He walked away without fully realizing he was moving until he found himself inside a convenience store. The place was nearly empty aside from a distracted cashier. Izuku picked up some food and then glanced at the television mounted near the ceiling. A headline scrolled saying a middle schooler had been held by a sludge villain and saved by All Might. The screen switched to footage of Katsuki Bakugo being praised by other heroes. Izuku stood there, haunted by what he had lost and by the world that had failed him, feeling as if everything had changed in a single terrible night. He recognized a few of them from the patrols in his area. As he pieced things together, he realized that one of the heroes had said the others who normally patrolled had been called away to help. That meant All Might had dropped the bottle that had contained the villain while he had clung to his leg, and by doing so he had set the villain free. The same villain had almost killed Bakugo because All Might had run out of time. He felt no guilt. He told himself that the villain should have died for what he had done to him. He thought the villain deserved to suffer and did not deserve to live. If All Might had contained him properly, heroes would still have patrolled his area and his mother might still be alive. It was their fault. He regained his composure, paid for his food, and left while the heroes on the screen praised Bakugo. These heroes did not deserve their titles, especially All Might. Walking away, he caught his reflection in a puddle and saw that his quirk had altered his appearance when it awakened. The green parts of his hair had lightened to a seaweed tone, and his usual viridian eyes had shifted to a mustard yellow. He did not care. He needed to understand his abilities. He had hyper-regeneration and enhanced strength, speed, endurance, and likely durability, though none of it showed in his thin frame. He could summon sickles at will, and his body had adapted until he was skillful at using them. He still could not believe it was happening. Why could the world be so cruel? Why did the more fortunate not help the poor? He dropped to his knees, abandoned his food, and screamed and pounded his fists into the ground. He blamed the heroes and the society that had created him. He vowed he would never show mercy to anyone who had belittled or betrayed him or who had led a better life. After he calmed, only sorrow and hatred remained. He rose again with vengeance clouding his mind and swore that he would make those he blamed pay. He left behind what had once been his old life. Izuku Midoriya was gone. The demon who called himself Jutaro remained. Some months later, Jutaro had learned to control his new power and built a reputation. He discovered that his blood secreted a potent toxin that could incapacitate or kill quickly, and he practiced how to use it at night on the various heroes he encountered. He also learned to shape his blood into sharp projectiles and other forms, using them with precision in swift, anime-style attacks rather than in graphic ways. The underground began to fear him, and people nicknamed him the Demon of Death. He welcomed the recognition and the fear. He targeted scumbags from mob bosses to heroes ranked in the top 50, relishing each strike as a way to channel the frustration from his past. In another place, Tamura Shigaraki was absorbed in a hack-and-slash game with strategic elements that his mentor had given him. His caretaker and butler, Kurojairi, appeared to inform him that Master wished to speak. The television above them shifted to a sound-only feed, and Sensei asked whether Tamura had been enjoying the new game and whether it had been teaching him well. Tamura told Sensei that he had been enjoying it very much. Sensei then asked him to recruit someone for their ranks, a figure known in the underground as the Demon of Death, who had recently risen to prominence and been reported to kill both villains and heroes, including some ranked in the top 50. Sensei explained that the individual would be useful in their plans to dismantle hero society. Tamura judged the prospect and decided the newcomer sounded impressive, adding that as long as the man did not anger him, he would have Kurojairi look for him. Sensei suggested the man might be somewhere near Mizudafu and reminded Tamura that first impressions mattered, expressing particular interest in the type of quirk the man possessed. Kurojairi bowed and warped away to begin the search. Tamura returned to his game but could not shake the conversation from his mind. He wondered why Sensei was so interested in this new figure and whether Sensei already knew what kind of quirk he had as he continued to play. Tamura eventually shrugged it off and figured he could be a good addition to the group. After all, if even his mentor recommended him, he must be powerful. Jutaro had just defeated another hero. The hero had been entangled with a dealer, and both were killed in the confrontation. Jutaro had grown stronger with each victory and had realized his power increased after every kill. He scoffed when the hero pleaded, irritated that someone who had lived a privileged life would beg. Another fallen hero had carried a missing person poster that bore a phone number Jotaro recognized as belonging to his aunt Mitsuki, Bakugo's mother. Mitsuki and his own mother had once been close friends, though they had grown apart as his mother became busier with work. Whenever he had seen Aunt Mitsuki, she had been kind to him and had a way of keeping Katsuki in line. Jotaro smiled faintly at the reminder that at least someone still thought of him. The smile faded quickly, replaced by a frown at the reminder of his past life, when he had been a weak, worthless Deku. He crumpled the paper and tossed it aside, then moved on, looking for more opponents to defeat. A portal opened in front of him, and a man wreathed in purple mist and dressed in a tuxedo stepped through. Jotaro summoned his sickles, glaring at the newcomer and demanding to know who he was. The man introduced himself as Kurojairi and explained that he spoke for the League of Villains. He believed Jotaro was the one known as the Demon of Death and said the League's leader requested Jotaro's presence at their hideout. Jotaro paused where he wanted to know their goal and asked whether their intent was merely senseless destruction. Kurojairi answered that their aim was to bring down the current hero system, which they saw as corrupted by fame and fortune, a system where many heroes only performed when cameras were present. Surprised to hear a purpose beyond chaos, Jotaro agreed to hear their leader out, putting away his sickles. Kurojairi opened a warp gate and gestured for him to enter. On the other side he stepped into a bar and saw a boy a few years older than himself, dressed in black with pale blue hair and a pale hand attached to his face. The two stared at one another. Kurojairi told the blue-haired boy, Tamura, that Jotaro had agreed to come. Tamura sneered that Jotaro was uglier than expected. Jotaro shot back with an insult about Tamura's crusty appearance and lack of self-care. Tamura's hand tightened around a glass and the cup crumbled into dust in his grip, catching Jotaro's attention. Tamura rose and walked toward Jotaro despite Kurojairi's warning. Standing a few feet away, Tamura demanded to know why a high-level non-player character like Jotaro had drawn his mentor's interest. He questioned how special Jotaro really was, pointing out that while Jotaro's stats enabled him to defeat top heroes, the highest-ranked opponent he had taken down was only number 40, and he pressed for a backstory. Jotaro considered the question but refused to share his past on trust alone. He explained that he had come because Kurojairi had told him about the League's goals and that his own motives overlapped with theirs. He admitted resentment toward people who had enjoyed better lives than he had and ignored those beneath them, and he revealed that he held a particular grudge against the number one hero. Shigaraki removed the pale hand from his face and revealed a crazed smile. He declared that he, too, hated All Might and the society that allowed heroes like him to flourish. He said he had misjudged Jotaro and that their grievances aligned. Shigaraki proposed that they join forces to dismantle the current order and build a new world where monsters like them would be treated fairly and the corrupt heroes would be gone. They both broke into raucous laughter before calming, and Shigaraki invited Jotaro to see what the League had been preparing to defeat All Might. Jotaro agreed, answering in kind, and the two began to walk together. Shigaraki led Jotaro deeper into the base and into another room. Inside was a laboratory lined with tubes holding strange specimens. Shigaraki explained that the tanks before them were secret weapons called Nomu, engineered to help them destroy the current society and rebuild it in their image. Jotaro inspected one of the husks and commented that he had not thought anything could be uglier than himself. Shigaraki snickered, and an older man in a lab coat, bald with goggles, interjected and remarked that the Nomu were not exactly alive and that Jotaro was still the ugliest thing alive. Jotaro recognized the scientist as Dr. Tsubasa, the man who had formerly diagnosed him as quirkless. Dr. Tsubasa acknowledged young Midoriya and noted that he had eventually developed a powerful quirk. Jotaro accepted the praise with a smirk, then froze when he saw another tank. He identified the contents as belonging to the scientist's grandson and asked if those were his wings. The scientist rose and stood beside the tank. He confirmed that it had been his grandson and admitted openly that he had not cared for the boy, only for his quirk, since flying quirks were rare. Jotaro declared that he did not mind, insisting the boy was better used for something useful than left to waste. The scientist laughed and revealed that he preferred to be called Garaki, that Tsubasa had been a false name, and that he was pleased Jotaro had sided with them. Garaki offered assistance and requested permission to study Jotaro's quirk in exchange, a proposal Jotaro accepted with a grin. Jotaro returned to Shigaraki, who was waiting on his phone, and the two went back to the bar where Kurojairi served them drinks. Shigaraki had a soda while Jotaro took sake. Shigaraki asked what Jotaro thought of their weapons. Jotaro replied that they had a chance of defeating their target, particularly if they aimed for a known weak spot. Shigaraki paused, surprised that their enemy had a vulnerability. Jotaro explained that the target had a large scar on his side from a fierce battle years earlier, a detail the target had foolishly revealed after Jotaro had witnessed his true form. Shigaraki concluded that the mission would be easier than expected and noted that if plans went awry, a swipe from Jotaro's sickles could incapacitate someone. They clinked their drinks and finished them. The television in the bar turned on with sound only at first, then the image appeared. A man hooked to tubes, the upper half of his face hidden beneath layers of scar tissue with no visible eyes, addressing them. Jotaro felt a momentary unease but steadied himself as the man identified himself as Sensei, the leader of the league, and congratulated them on recruiting Tamura. Tamura felt a surge of pride at pleasing Sensei. Sensei asked to speak with the new recruit privately. Tamura and Kurojairi left, and Sensei remarked on Jotaro's youth and asked about his identity. Jotaro introduced himself. Sensei welcomed him, explaining that he was the leader of the league and that Tamura was his ward. Jotaro said that he and Sensei's ward shared the same goals and that he looked forward to working together. Sensei inquired about Jotaro's quirk, noting its unusual characteristics. Jotaro examined his hand and admitted that he did not fully understand how it worked. He said that when he had jumped from the roof, waves of sadness and anger had surged through him and that his willpower had manifested into a power that allowed him to strike back at those who had wronged him. Sensei thanked Jotaro for his answer and expressed confidence in him as a companion for his ward. He outlined a plan that required Jotaro to infiltrate UA when the new year began and to return with the school's schedule. Jotaro bowed and pledged not to fail, promising to prove his worth. Sensei chuckled and suggested that Tamura would be eager to show him some of his games. Jotaro nodded and left while the monitor turned off. In a hidden location, Sensei, known as All for One, grinned as he observed the progress. He reflected that the pieces were being set, that All Might would soon fall, and that Jotaro would learn who his successor was, which would further fuel his hatred of the world. He believed this would be a turning point in their favor and watched his plans unfold. Bakugo thought about the year that had passed since Inko's death and Deku's disappearance. Inko had become quiet and withdrawn, she no longer scolded him or reacted to his curses, and his father had grown even more silent than usual. They both assumed the nerd was gone, but Bakugo refused to believe Deku dead, certain that Deku was too stubborn to quit on his dream of being a hero. At Aldera, the news had either been ignored or celebrated. The school had even held a party for Deku's disappearance, which disgusted Bakugo. He counted down the weeks until he could leave that school and enroll at UA, the dream he shared with Deku. He had passed the entrance exam easily, ranking first, a result that brought only a little cheer from his parents. Bakugo also recalled that he had been approached by All Might. It turned out that he had a quirk called One for All that could be passed on, and he deemed me worthy to inherit it. Of course I accepted, since it would help me get closer to becoming the #1 hero. All Might told me to meet him at Dagoba Beach the next day to begin training. When I arrived, the entire beach was covered in junk, and All Might expected me to clean all of it. For the next 10 months I worked like hell, and eventually the place was spotless. All Might complimented my tenacity. He then plucked one of his hairs and told me the quirk transferred through DNA, so I begrudgingly ate it. The power hit hard the first time I used it, it broke my arm. The good news was there was still about a month until the exams, and All Might and I figured out that I wasn't channeling the power through my whole body, I was focusing it at single points. By exam day I had about 5% of it under control. My first day of school was something else. After I settled into a seat, a student who moved like he lived to be fast demanded that I take my feet off my desk. I thought he was being ridiculous, but the room filled up and someone in a sleeping bag came to the podium and introduced himself as Shota Aizawa. Aizawa told the class to meet him somewhere else for a quirk apprehension test. Aizawa called me up first and told me to throw a ball as far as I could using my quirk. I ended up with a distance of 740.5 meters, and the other students complimented the result. Aizawa got irritated by something someone said and announced that whoever came in last would be expelled. When the tests finished, I had placed third overall, just behind Icy Hot and Ponytail. Aizawa then revealed it had been a ruse and that no one would be expelled. I hadn't been worried about last place anyway. The next day was heroics class. All Might appeared and told everyone to change, then explain the exercise. I was paired with a fast-moving student while we faced a ragazza named Uraraka and a guy named Shinso. I ordered my partner to guard the bomb while I searched the area, and I ran into the purple-haired student first. I remember yelling at him when he called me something, and the next thing I knew I was tied up and our team lost. I was sad, but I had to accept it. A red-haired student later tried to talk to me, but I didn't pay much attention to the rest of the extras. The following day at lunch, Kirishima sat with me along with Kaminari, Mina, and Siro. They rambled about random things I wasn't really listening to when an alarm went off and everyone panicked. Someone announced that it was a level 3 alarm and that someone must have broken in. I tried to get away from the crowd and got separated from the others, so I ducked through a random door and started walking to get out of the chaos. After a while I heard noises coming from a room and assumed it was a teacher who could take me back to 1A. When I opened the door, it wasn't a teacher or a student, it was an intruder. I reacted and began producing tiny explosions in my hands. The intruder stared for a moment, then began to giggle and said I hadn't changed and didn't even recognize him anymore. He said he looked very different the last time we saw each other. I rushed forward with one for all coursing through me and landed a punch. The intruder turned back to face me and commented that I had gotten stronger, which made sense since a hero needed strength to succeed. Then the intruder struck me in the gut, and I staggered before being kicked hard into a desk. Something felt broken and I started to lose consciousness. A portal appeared behind the intruder. He said we would meet again and that I would not need to worry about collateral damage next time. As he stepped through the portal, he called me Kakin, and the last thing I saw before blacking out was his grin. It was the next day. Aizawa announced to the class that they would go to the USJ, the unforeseen simulation joint. Everyone was excited to go, except Bakugo, who was still thinking about his encounter with the villain from the previous day and the warning he had received. He found himself seated on the bus next to Todoroki and decided not to engage, staring out the window, when Tsuyu asked him why he sometimes emitted electricity when he used his explosion quirk. Bakugo scowled and told her to mind her own business. The class fell quiet and returned to their own conversations, not wanting to provoke him further. Todoroki looked curious about Bakugo's reaction, and Kirishima looked worried. They soon arrived at the building and were greeted by Rescue Hero 13. Uraraka gushed over him as he began explaining the training exercise, but in the middle of his briefing a purple portal opened and a horde of villains poured out. Kirishima assumed they were part of the simulation, but 13 shouted that the villains were real and ordered everyone to get to safety. On the other side of the portal, Shigaraki, Jutaro, Kurogiri, and a Nomu arrived. Shigaraki complained that All Might was not there and asked his companion whether the schedule was right. Jutaro scoffed at the idea and suggested that if All Might did not come, they would make him come by targeting the students. Kurogiri bowed and prepared to warp them away. Kurogiri's mist spread through the entrance and began distorting around the students, warping some of them away to different zones. Rescue Hero 13 worked to clear some of the mist, but Kurogiri managed to create a warp gate that immobilized 13 with his own quirk. He began dragging students through portals, but not all were taken as 13 fought to clear the fog. 13 ordered Ida, the fastest student, to run to UA and inform the teachers. Ida protested that it would be disgraceful to leave his classmates, but Uraraka urged him on, telling him he was the only one fast enough. Conflict flickered across Ida's face, then he nodded and prepared to run. 13 signaled that she would distract Kurogiri while Ida made his escape. Kurogiri sneered that the plan was foolish, then shot mist forward. 13 managed to absorb some of it, but Kurogiri opened another warp gate behind her and used the mist to hinder her movements. Ida took off, with Kurogiri closing in. Uraraka leaped forward, touched Kurogiri to make him weightless, and threw him away. Shiro used his tape to latch onto Kurogiri's neck guard while Sato grabbed and held it, giving Ida the opening he needed to get through the door. Kurogiri retreated and reported to his masters that one student had gotten away and was en route to UA. Shigaraki reacted with annoyance and scratched himself in frustration. Jotaro suggested that All Might would now know what was happening and would likely arrive first, which would give them an opportunity to strike. Shigaraki nodded at the prospect. Nearby, two students, Tsuyu and Mineta, watched from the shore. Jotaro noticed them and rushed forward with sickles in hand. In a sudden, swift strike, the two students were overwhelmed and collapsed into the water. Jotaro watched, satisfied at having neutralized them, and they did not get back up. Bakugo erupted toward Jotaro, rocketing forward with an enormous explosion aimed at the villain. Jotaro had not seen him and took the full force of the blast, which knocked him back and singed his clothing. When Bakugo landed and glared with murderous intent, the figure addressed him by his childhood nickname, Kaken, and taunted him, suggesting that removing the extra students had done him a favor by clearing obstacles to his rise. Bakugo, lowering his voice, stated that he knew who the figure really was. It was Izuku Midoriya. The figure feigned surprise that Bakugo had recognized him and praised Bakugo's intelligence and fortunate life while speaking with bitter mockery. He scratched at himself in agitation, tearing at his clothing and leaving angry red marks where he had scratched. The figure said he envied Bakugo and wished for Bakugo's death, describing a desire for a slow, agonizing end. Bakugo's expression softened for a moment as he asked what had happened to Izuku. The figure answered that Bakugo himself was to blame, accusing him of being the catalyst for the changes that had come to his life. He began to explain how he had tried to end his life, but fate had given him a new power and a drive for vengeance. He claimed that when he returned home, he found his loved one gone and blamed the heroes who had failed to protect their area. Bridge sentence inserted to maintain plot flow. The clash continued as the heroes and students fought to regroup while the villains spread chaos across the facility, each side driven by their own motives and the growing stakes of the battle. Tamura Shigaraki recalled that his mother had died in his arms because she did not go out with a hero, and he reflected bitterly on how pathetic a society that prioritized people like them over others had become. Bakugo cried out to Izuku, apologizing and begging him to come back. Jotaro regarded them with an unimpressed look and told them that Izuku Midoriya had died that day and that he had been left in his wake as he took a fighting stance. He made it clear he would show no mercy and hurled his sickles. Bakugo barely avoided the blades, and Jotaro lunged again. Bakugo answered by pushing his power and charging forward with one for all, preparing a right hook. Jotaro blocked and landed a heavy strike to Bakugo's face, leaving him reeling. Before Bakugo could recover, Jotaro drove a knee into his midsection and knocked the air from him, then forced him to the ground with a brutal stomp that left him dazed. Kirishima intervened and speared Jotaro away from Bakugo. Annoyed by the interference, Jotaro summoned his sickles and tried to slash at Kirishima, but Kirishima rapidly activated his hardening and blocked the attack. Jotaro shouted that the fight was between him and Bakugo and ordered Kirishima to stop, but Kirishima refused, insisting he would not leave Bakugo alone. He leapt high and slammed down, but Jotaro dodged and clung to a wall. The two collided again as Jotaro lunged with a sickle. It struck Kirishima's hardened arm in a clash that produced a sharp explosion of force. Shigaraki reacted by ordering the Nomu to maintain its hold on Eraserhead and to attack the red-haired youth. The Nomu roared and charged while still clutching the barely conscious Aizawa. Kirishima braced and hardened his whole body, but the Nomu's impact sent him crashing into a nearby wall. Jotaro nodded at Shigaraki in thanks for dealing with Kirishima and then turned back to Bakugo, running at him with sickles raised. Bakugo pushed his power to the limit and unleashed a massive explosion that engulfed Jotaro. The blast left Bakugo's left wrist injured, but he accepted the cost, thinking it worth the damage. When the smoke cleared, Jotaro remained standing, badly burned but still grinning. He taunted Bakugo that it was just like old times, with Bakugo using his quirk and Jotaro taking the hits, a reminder of when Jotaro had been weaker. Bakugo's face registered a mix of hurt and anger as they readied themselves to continue until a familiar presence announced his arrival. All Might declared his presence, and he was not smiling. Izuku watched him arrive and noted that the lack of a smile made All Might seem unusually serious. He turned to find Bakugo gone, then felt sudden, sharp pain in his midsection. Looking down to see a large hand and then back up, he found All Might glaring at him while holding Bakugo in the other arm. Izuku glared back at the interruption, and All Might hurled him back toward Tamura, sending him skidding across the floor. Izuku rose, brushed himself off as his burns began to heal, and assessed the situation. He told his companion that they had underestimated All Might and instructed that the Nomu should be sent in, emphasizing that they needed to aim for the creature's weak spot and, especially, to avoid announcing their quirks in advance. He teased that his companion had a habit of revealing what they had. The companion protested indignantly, and Izuku dryly reminded him of past examples of that tendency. After a moment, the companion sputtered and finally ordered the Nomu to press the attack. All Might set Bakugo down beside a child who happened to look like a candy cane and matched the Nomu blow for blow. The Nomu gradually gained the upper hand and landed a hard strike to All Might's side, forcing him to stagger. Izuku allowed himself a small, grim smile at the shift in momentum, watching as All Might was pushed onto the defensive while the Nomu showed no sign of relenting. Tamura grinned at the sight of the symbol of peace being pressured and urged the Nomu to finish the job. The Nomu charged for what looked like a final blow to All Might's head, but it halted suddenly when a nearby figure used a freezing effect. Shigaraki called out for Kurogiri to intervene, but before Kurogiri could act, Bakugo rocketed forward and slammed him to the ground, holding him fast with the support of his neck brace. Izuku looked up and saw Kirishima attempting to attack, so he quickly dodged while pulling Tamura with him to keep moving. This gave All Might time to jump back toward the students, though I noticed that he was holding his injured side in pain. All Might muttered that the move would have been impressive if he had landed it. The ice user berated them, saying that one of our thugs had told him their plan was to kill All Might and asking how stupid they could be to think they could defeat him. Tamura scolded his butler Kurogiri for being caught off guard by an injured kid after Jotaro had been dominating him. Kurogiri stammered an apology while trying to retreat, but Bakugo activated his quirk and sent him back down. Bakugo sneered and began to explain what he had figured out, but I tuned him out. I nodded to Tamura to signal the next move and ordered the Nomu to show what it could do. The Nomu stopped struggling and shattered the frozen restraints on its limbs, rearranging them in a disturbing, mechanical way before rapidly repairing itself. The heroes reacted in horror. All Might called out in astonishment, surprised that the Nomu was regenerating so quickly. The figure with the candy cane motif said that a thug had also told him the Nomu had a shock-absorbing quirk, which explained why their attacks seemed ineffective. I was angry that they knew the Nomu's abilities, but I told them with a grin that our Nomu had 3 quirks, perfectly suited to kill All Might. Shigaraki ordered the Nomu to free their transportation. The Nomu charged Bakugo, collided with him, and sent him crashing into a concrete wall. Bakugo was saved, and All Might stepped into a defensive position with the sleeves of his dress shirt torn. All Might grunted that they had not even held back on a child. I told him that mercy was not something they deserved, glancing at Bakugo, who only glared back. Tamura launched into a tirade, accusing the heroes of pretending their violence was noble and calling All Might a government-sponsored instrument of force. He insisted that violence only bred more violence and vowed to make the world understand that once All Might was gone. All Might responded by calling Tamura a lunatic and saying that villains like him tried to dress up their crimes as something noble, and that Tamura was acting out of pleasure. The 3 students readied themselves to attack, but All Might told them to stand down and let a pro handle it. Shigaraki glared and ordered Kurogiri and the Nomu to attack All Might while the rest of them handled the students. Shigaraki and I ran forward, his hands ready and my sickles summoned, both of us radiating lethal intent. Before we could reach them, a shockwave blasted us backward as All Might charged forward. Shigaraki shouted that the Nomu had shock absorption and hyperregeneration and that it seemed undefeatable. All Might countered that absorption was not the same as nullification and that there must be a limit. He then targeted the Nomu with a series of precise, sparking blows. Watching closely, I realized All Might was not throwing random punches. He was aiming at a specific spot to prevent regeneration, and his body started to emit sparks of energy that looked like Bakugo's but in a different color. The implication hit me. All Might had chosen a successor who showed a similar electric signature. I kept watching as All Might gathered himself for a final, powerful strike, calling on everything he had and pushing beyond his normal limits. All Might unleashed his finishing charge, pouring all his strength into one last blow. The Nomu was sent through the roof and blasted far away. I laughed, then broke into full, mocking cackling as the heroes stared at me in confusion. I taunted them about All Might's display, then revealed that I now knew who his successor was. The color drained from the pro's face and from Bakugo's as the students looked on, bewildered. I screamed that All Might did not remember who I was and demanded a reminder, forcing a distorted, innocent expression. I reminded him that he had told me to jump off a roof if I wanted a quirk when I was a child, and I raged that he had chosen the very person who had made my life miserable to be his successor. I declared that this was unforgivable and unleashed my power, invoking my blood demon art to summon flying sickles of scarlet energy. The waves of energy shot toward All Might and battered him, forcing him to strain and withdraw. Bakugo reacted and blasted some of the projectiles away while shouting at me. I sneered and commanded the sickles to reform and target the other two students. The reformed blade struck and forced the students to fall back, injured and struggling. Shigaraki recovered and dashed toward the distracted All Might, intending to finish him. Before he could close the distance, a bullet struck my shoulder and hit Shigaraki's limbs. I barely had time to register the impact as my body began to regenerate. I looked up and, to my annoyance, saw multiple pro heroes arriving, all prepared for a fight. Damaged and compromised, our plans were suddenly in jeopardy. Jotaro called to Kurojairi and instructed him to take Tamura away for a moment and return in a minute, explaining that he had something to do before leaving. Kurojairi hesitated, addressing him with concern as master, but followed the order and warped Tamura and himself out of sight. Jotaro sighed, then turned to face the assembled heroes and students. Vlad King taunted him for seeming to face them alone. Jotaro glared back and told them that he was not foolish enough to take on a team of pro heroes and students by himself, that he was there only to deliver a warning. He made it clear that their actions that day were only the beginning of his resistance against society, and he threatened that next time they met they would make sure to kill All Might, delivering the threat with a sickening grin. A portal opened behind him. Before stepping through, Jotaro announced one final parting act aimed at All Might. He used his power to strike All Might's arm in a way that disabled the hand without any graphic detail. The blow caused All Might to cry out and drew terrified responses from a few students and heroes, which pleased Jotaro. He stepped through the portal, leaving his message behind. Jotaro returned to the bar with a smile still on his face. The doctor was tending to Shigaraki's bullet wounds and Kurojairi was behind the counter preparing drinks. Shigaraki noticed Jotaro's arrival but remained silent because of the pain. A monitor activated and All for One's voice filled the room, lamenting that the mission had not succeeded. Shigaraki, bandaged and agitated, complained that their plan had been perfect and that the students had interfered. Kurojairi told him calmly to settle down and drink his soda, which Shigaraki did begrudgingly. He then turned his anger toward Jotaro, accusing him of misjudging All Might and giving the enemy an advantage. Jotaro pushed up into Tamura's face and retorted that the success of the heroes was due to the power of friendship the way All Might had inspired them. Tamura demanded to know why Jotaro had stayed behind. Jotaro answered with a grin, saying that he had taken action that would make it difficult for All Might to use his right hand. Tamura reacted with apparent satisfaction and asked if Jotaro's poison would finish All Might off. Jotaro replied, matter-of-factly, that he had ensured his poison would not affect All Might. Shigaraki's expression fell, and in anger he used his quirk to shatter his drinking glass. He angrily asked why Jotaro had not simply finished All Might when he had the chance. Jotaro explained that it would be more satisfying to eliminate All Might's successor in front of him now that he knew Bakugo was the next holder of One for All. Shigaraki paused to process this, then calmed and apologized for his outburst, admitting that his anger over the foiled plan had clouded his judgment. Jutaro accepted the apology and reminded him that they needed to learn from the failure and move on. All for One, who had been listening, offered his counsel next. He advised them to recruit more capable members rather than expendable minions, and suggested that they study the enemy more closely. He proposed that attending the sports festival, if it were to occur, would provide a prime opportunity to observe a variety of quirks in action. Jutaro recommended looking into the hero killer Stain as a potential high-skill recruit, noting that Stain shared similar ideals and that Jutaro had trained with him in the past, though he warned that recruiting Stain would be difficult. All for One acknowledged the suggestion and, impressed, told them to rest after their long day. He added that he would make arrangements to obtain tickets for the festival if it happened and dismissed them. The two left for their rooms while Kurojairi continued to clean the bar in silence. On the monitor, All for One spoke again with a tone of resignation about his limited time. He explained that his last fight with All Might had nearly killed him and that he now relied on life support. AFO told Kurojairi that his next fight would be his last. Kurojairi asked with concern whether the doctor's mask he was creating would help. AFO explained that it was only a prototype meant to keep him alive when he went outside and that the doctor predicted he would die at the end of the coming summer. He accepted that inevitability with solemn calm. After a pause, AFO asked Kurojairi for an important promise. When he died and passed his quirk to Tamura, Kurojairi should serve and protect the young master no matter what. Kurojairi vowed that he would fulfill his duty, even if it cost him his life. AFO gave a rare, genuine smile and the monitor went dark. Kurojairi returned to his tasks while the weight of his master's words lingered in his thoughts. At the USJ, police and paramedics moved through the scene, taking statements and tending to the injured. Eraserhead, All Might, and the now deceased Mineta and Azui were carried away, and the two who had died were covered so that responders could proceed with their work. Katsuki Bakugo sat apart from the group, wrapped in bandages but otherwise better off than many of his classmates. He blamed himself for what had happened, thinking that if he had not bullied Izuku none of this would be occurring. He remembered their shared dream of becoming the top heroes together and felt the failure keenly. Convinced he had to do something to fix what had been broken, he decided he would tell his classmates the truth. UA gave the students a week off to recover from the USJ events. When they returned, spirits had lifted a little, but empty seats reminded them of those they had lost. Aizawa also returned, his body wrapped in bandages and both arms in casts held by slings. When students asked why he had come back, he curtly said his injuries were none of their concern. He announced that the sports festival would still take place in 2 weeks. The students worried about another attack, and Aizawa reassured them that heroes would be patrolling the stadium. The faculty had reservations about holding the festival, but Nizu explained that the Hero Commission had ordered it to proceed. Before lunch, Aizawa told the class that Bakugo and All Might had something important to share and called Tashinori Yagi forward. When Tashinori entered, bandages covered him and his right hand was gone. The class reacted in shock. Momo Yaoyorozu noted his missing hand, and Tashinori smiled reassuringly while explaining that a prosthetic was already being prepared and he would recover his strength. The students relaxed a little at that hope. Bakugo stood beside Tashinori and took a steadying breath. He revealed that the man who had been standing next to the sludge villain, the one with green hair, was someone he had known before coming to UA. He admitted that he had been the reason that man had become a villain. He named the man as Izuku Midoriya and explained that Midoriya had been quirkless, that Bakugo had bullied him, and that his behavior contributed to the path Izuku had taken. The confession stunned the class and even Aizawa struggled to find a reaction. Bakugo said he would not blame anyone who could not forgive him. He confessed that this burden was his alone and that he felt responsible. He vowed to try to save Izuku, even if that required actions he did not want to take. He told them they deserved to know the truth and ended there. Silence filled the room as everyone processed what they had heard. Eijiro Kirishima stood and confronted Bakugo, calling his past actions wrong and pointing out that he had bullied someone for something beyond their control. Bakugo listened without meeting Kirishima's eyes. Then Kirishima said that what Bakugo had just shared showed he had changed, and he spoke for the class in offering their support. One by one the others nodded, and Bakugo felt a deep relief at being forgiven by his friends. Aizawa rose and told Bakugo that, under different circumstances, he would have expelled him and pursued harsher consequences. He acknowledged, however, that Bakugo's recent actions risking himself to protect others showed real change. Bakugo bowed to thank his teacher for the chance to make amends. Toshinori stepped forward and admitted that he regretted telling the young Midoriya on the day of the sludge villain incident that he could not become a hero without a quirk. He confessed that he had been wrong and that his own experience of gaining a quirk later made him realize the weight of that answer. All Might declared that the burden was his to bear and, echoing young Bakugo, he would not rest until he found and saved him. The class forgave All Might after a short discussion, and he was grateful. Aizawa reminded the students that the USJ incident had been traumatic and suggested booking counseling at Hound Dog. He explained that seeking therapy was not a sign of weakness and that he himself attended sessions to stay mentally fit as a hero. He also reminded them that they had 2 weeks to train for the festival and that heroes would be scouting for internships, so they should prepare to show their best. He told them to go now or they would miss lunch. The class responded in agreement to their teacher and headed to lunch with a renewed goal. Later, as their teacher had arranged, Tamura and Izuku obtained tickets to the sports festival. Someone had used a quirk to alter their appearances so they would not be recognized. After that, Kurogyri warped them near the festival grounds. Tamura wore his usual black hoodie and long pants, while Izuku wore a green hoodie with dark blue pants. They presented their tickets and the attendant did not recognize them, just as their teacher had said. They took their seats and began taking notes. Present Mike announced the participating classes, starting with Class 1A and proceeding through 1B, the general courses, support courses, and the business courses. Once everyone was gathered, Midnight announced that Bakugo would lead the student pledge. Tamura asked if Bakugo was the one with All Might's quirk. Izuku confirmed, complaining that he did not understand why the blonde man had given the quirk to Bakugo, since it would only feed his ego. Bakugo stepped up and spoke about how his past self might have insulted everyone, but someone had shown him that behaving that way would prove he had not changed. Because of that lesson, he said, he had formed real connections with his classmates and was proud to call them friends. He urged everyone not to hold back so their training would not be wasted, and he concluded by calling on them to show the world they could go plus ultra. His words earned applause. Izuku scowled as Bakugo returned to his peers, furious that Bakugo had the audacity to attribute his change to Izuku's supposed turn to evil. Tamura leaned in and whispered for him to calm down because he was attracting attention, which made Izuku notice people staring. Izuku glared until they looked away and then muttered an apology. Tamura reminded him that it would be dangerous to lose control in a place filled with heroes. Midnight then announced that the first event would be an obstacle course, a good opportunity for Izuku and Tamura to observe quirks in action. They prepared their notebooks and agreed that Izuku would record the students from Class 1A while Tamura recorded 1B, since their primary interest lay with someone in 1A, but it would be unwise to ignore the others. The obstacle course required competitors to avoid various hazards and reach the end. The first challenge involved large robots similar to those used in hero entrance exams, followed by a wide pit they had to cross, and finally a non-lethal minefield. Todoroki finished first, with Bakugo close behind. The next event was a cavalry battle in which teams of 2 to 4 competed for points based on their placements. The top prize awarded an enormous point value, making it very difficult to take away from Todoroki, who demonstrated exceptional control over his quirk. Todoroki's team won the cavalry battle, followed by Bakugo's team, then Shinsu's and Uraraka's. The event revealed much about the students' quirks and teamwork. During the break before the final one-on-one matches, Tamura asked if anyone had stood out to Izuku. Izuku noted several students. The girl who could create objects appeared to have a highly useful creation quirk for team situations, and Endeavor's child showed remarkable control over their own quirk, though they had not yet been seen using their fire. The narrator explained that Kaminari's quirk could rival Bakugo's or Todoroki's if he trained it properly, but toward the end it looked as though he was immobilized from overuse. The narrator added that Tokoyami's dark shadow was sentient, making it another rare type of quirk. They walked back to their seats with food and drinks in hand. They sat and began eating. The narrator noted that it was odd American food was being served at a Japanese sports festival and mentioned that the last time they attended something similar it had been bento boxes and noodles. The narrator asked Shigaraki about it. Shigaraki shrugged and continued eating his pretzel. The narrator then asked if anyone in particular had stood out to him. Shigaraki paused with a look of concentration before saying that Monoma had caught his attention. When the narrator asked what was special about Monoma, Shigaraki explained that Monoma had a copy quirk, another rare ability, and that Monoma had seemed to understand the limits of that power when provoking people on the field. Shigaraki said Monoma had targeted selectively to avoid provoking anyone with a strong quirk and to avoid revealing his own ability while taking headbands. Shigaraki regretted that Monoma had not made it past the second round, saying he would have liked to see what else Monoma could do. The narrator widened their eyes at Shigaraki's remark, and Shigaraki noticed the reaction. Shigaraki asked what the narrator was staring at. The narrator dismissed it, and Shigaraki gave a slight glare before returning to his food. Present Mike announced that the final event would be one-on-one matches. The narrator grinned and thought about seeing who might be worth recruiting. They watched the matches closely. Bakugo's POV. The festival had been relatively easy all things considered. Bakugo admitted he was annoyed at repeatedly placing second behind Icy Hot, but it was tolerable. Ojiro and a student from Class 1B had dropped out after being brainwashed by Shinso and later not remembering what had happened. Tetsu, Ibra, and Kendo filled the open slots, and Bakugo was matched against Uraraka. He hoped she would provide a real challenge, since he had not yet seen anything spectacular from her. The first-round winners had been Shinso, Todoroki, Ibara, Hida, Mina, Tokoyami, and Kirishima. When Bakugo stepped onto the field with Uraraka, Present Mike signaled the start. Uraraka charged straight at him, and Bakugo countered with explosions that repeatedly sent her back. He acknowledged that it took resolve for her to keep getting up and coming at him. During the match, Bakugo heard some heroes call him a bully, a label he rejected. He insisted that the person he had been was gone, and that the Katsuki who had turned his best friend into a villain no longer existed for him. Aizawa intervened on his behalf, which Bakugo appreciated. Bakugo won the match, though it was closer than many expected. Uraraka Kirby had used debris from the explosions to send material crashing toward him. Bakugo destroyed it in a single blast, which strained his hand. Uraraka later passed out, but Bakugo thought that if she had been able to continue she might have won. He acknowledged that she had earned his